A lot of people that watch aren't subscribed. So please, if you enjoy what we do here, please hit that subscribe button, share all of it. Season 6, episode 6, Dark Side of the Ring. We were both interested in this because we've heard people talk about Eddie Gilbert. I haven't watched a ton of Eddie Gilbert, and I was kind of interested what the story was going to be. How did you enjoy this episode coming off of the last one, which I thought Billy Graham was a little sad when you got into it?
I felt sad in this one, honestly. So I remember the first time I saw Eddie Gilbert was in Bill Watts' UWF. I saw him there, part of Hot Stuff International. Great heel. As a kid, I didn't like him. I wanted to, who's this guy, And the fact that he was on the shorter side and didn't necessarily look like he was going to beat you up to me made me even more hate him. And he was really good at playing that role. And he had a great finisher, though. That hot shot where he dropped you on your neck on the ropes. Great stuff. Yeah, Eddie, just his time in NWA, WCW is very interesting. And it was interesting to hear Cornette talk about how, Eddie was on the booking committee and he challenged Flair because Flair wanted Ron Simmons just to beat him. And, Eddie was like protecting himself like, this is Memphis. I'm not going to just do a clean job to Ron Simmons, who at that point, Simmons was still very new, despite the fact what a legitimate badass Simmons was. He was still very new to pro wrestling. So just to be handled so easily in Memphis, was Eddie looked at probably as, hey, this is going to hurt my business if I go back here, which is kind of an interesting thing, I thought, because that's a concept you're not going to really hear much about today. But overall, I thought very sad. I didn't know about Eddie's early car accident. I think I had forgot it, how bad it was and how he changed his style and he moved to different territories, and just hearing about that and hearing about, the problems he would have had with pills and stuff. And, hearing Medusa talk about that, despite all that he was this genuine, really good man. And she read that note that he had left for her, and, that's where I started to get a little emotional about this. Just like hearing this guy, that, he just wanted the best for this person and he never blamed her for everything that happened. And like, to me, that's a sign of like a good human being, right? When, things don't work out with someone you care about, but you can look in the mirror and still know that they're a good person and maybe you're at fault for some of this. That says a lot about your character. Again, kind of a sad one in the end, maybe even more so this week with Eddie Gilbert. Interesting, nonetheless.
Yeah, it came back in like 3 or 4 months from that car accident to be in ring, obviously leading to the pill issues. Whatever you may think of Doug Gilbert, it was great to hear from him in here and see that footage. A lot of what came across is just how good a guy he was and how, the business affected him. And it was kind of tough that he always wanted this one thing in the business to be able to book. And then when he gets the chance down in Puerto Rico, that's kind of where his life ends. And you heard from his other wife, former guest of the show, Missy Hyatt, through other interviews. And it was really interesting because you hear this influence that Eddie had on the business. And then you hear people like Cornette, Doug Gilbert talk about it. And it was great to see the shoot interview from Eddie as well, to hear him in his own words. And he really just kind of seemed like a regular guy that just got caught up with his problems in the wrestling business. And eventually they consumed him. One thing
also I took note of this was what a closeness he had with his family, the age difference between him and Doug. And I think it was brought up that I think he was like, Doug was only like 11 years old and Eddie was already like maybe wrestling, and he was bringing Doug around with him because, he just cared for his little brother and, he was very close to his family. And I thought that was a really cool thing about him as well.
Yeah, it was I think what made it sad was a lot of the character things in this, like you said, with how Medusa talked about him, how they talked about his relation with Doug. You saw it in the home videos they had. One thing that Dark Side of the Ring always does great was showing the footage from, when he was in the WWF. When he was in Memphis, he was part of that concession stand brawl that was, Onita was involved in. And then that further went on to influence like FMW. So this guy had a large reach of influence in the wrestling business. And it really was like a what if. Ricky Morton, we haven't even talked about him up until this point, former guest of the show, was another great talking head in this. And I thought this episode really lived up. We're getting close to the end of the season. And next week, I'm not going to say the biggest episode because I feel like the Sheik episode is going to be huge. But next week, Billy Jack Haynes, you saw the shot of him in jail. What are your expectations of the Billy Jack Haynes episode?
I think it's going to be one of the more wild ones. He's definitely done some crazy, crazy stuff. I am interested. Ironically, even before this episode was coming up, I had just watched some old primetime wrestling. And wouldn't you know, the main event was a match from the Boston Garden. It's right before WrestleMania 3. They're doing these 6-man elimination matches with some of the bigger stars with Rowdy Piper. And this particular one, it was Adrian Adonis, Hercules Hernandez, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff against Hulk Hogan, Rowdy Piper, and Billy Jack Haynes. So I just look at that and I see Billy and I see his, like, you know, his physique and the way he hit moves. And again, word of the day, believability, right? He was such a believable badass. And I'll be very interested to see how some of his antics, maybe outside the ring, might have cost him his career, because he definitely had a lot of potential.
Yeah, he's been in the news recently for that murder of his wife. But over the years, I've heard things about Billy Jack being a little bit wilder. So it's going to be interesting to see what they cover. I had heard that Billy Jack got a hold of them wanting to do this episode. So part of me is going to wonder, what are the stories? What are his side of the story is going to be? And it's going to be interesting to see this series continue further. And like we said at the top, a lot of people that watch us aren't subscribed. If you enjoyed what you just saw, please hit that subscribe button, share, like, get it around. We just like coming here each week to talk wrestling.